In Lesson 3, we will focus on the crucial stage of architectural projects, the project brief, references and inspiration. We will begin by exploring the client in some detail, understanding the client's needs, their lifestyle, their narrative, and additionally, we will explore the building's location and context and how this may shape the project's narrative. Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to answer the following questions. Who is the client? What is the client brief? What is the location? What is the context around this project? And we're also going to do some precedent research. We're going to look up on Pinterest and I'm going to create a mood board in Rayon and discuss through the various architectural features and material palette that we're going to explore throughout this project. So let's dive into the brief. So the client is Mr. and Mrs. Smith. They're a retired couple. And the location of the plot is in a coastal Cornwall town called Pras Sands. So this is set within a natural valley and hilly topography. If you're not aware of or familiar with Cornwall, Cornwall is absolutely beautiful. Pras Sands is a great kind of holiday destination in the UK. And they have acquired this plot which is near Pras Sands and has beautiful views towards the sea. As you can see down here, they've got absolutely stunning views over the landscape and views towards the sea, which we're going to utilise in our proposal. So the plot is for a retired couple who have worked and lived in London for 30 years. So I don't blame them for wanting to move down to Cornwall, somewhere a bit more remote, somewhere a bit more quiet, out in the countryside. I don't blame them. I think that's a good idea. And the project involves designing a 2-story, 3-bedroom home that integrates seamlessly into the natural landscape, respecting the unique topography and panoramic views over the sea, as we've discussed. They want to explore a contemporary architectural approach with reference into Cornwall's historic architectural heritage, and the material palette in Cornwall is very much kind of stone. You've got barns, rustic materials, and kind of a lot of timber, which I will discuss in a moment. But the local vernacular is very much kind of natural stones, timbers, cladding, and we want to explore those features in the proposal to make sure that we're responding to the local vernacular and we're not designing something that's going to look wildly out of place. We want to make sure that we're responding to the local context. And the brief is to, once again, build on those natural features of stone, timber, and they want expansive glazing to make sure that it's blending into the surrounding. It's making the most of those natural views and the natural landscape. But we're also going to obviously apply a bit of a modern, contemporary approach with the kind of material palette and how we're going to play with the kind of the volumes and the geometry and the architectural logic of the scheme. The couple have also required, they have some room requirements. So the first one is a open plan kitchen, living and dining, 70 square meters. So that is quite a significant area for an open plan space. So that would be something that we can embed into the design. Of course, they want a utility cupboard. They want a garage to store both of their cars. They want an office space in case they want to do any admin work or whatever you do when you're retired. Obviously, they want a toilet, a master bedroom, which is going to be a significant feature of the project, an ensuite, and then obviously they want 2 bedrooms and a shared bathroom. So they're the required, the kind of room requirements, which we'll go into a bit more detail when we come across to the later lessons when we talk about massing and zoning. But this gives us a good indication of the kind of scale and the size of these spaces and the plot that we're working with. Some of the local architectural features that I've picked up on here that I wanted to discuss and that I thought were interesting to explore and respond to. First, obviously, the Cornwall stone, which is a very famous material in Cornwall, hence Cornwall stone, which is a stone that we want to kind of utilize and explore in our proposal. Barns are a very prominent architecture feature in Cornwall, so that is something that we can kind of lean into. We can maybe do a kind of more modern interpretation, a contemporary interpretation of a barn. And then finally, there was this little cottage that I found, which I thought was really interesting to indicate that there are actually some quite modern designs in the area. Although we're probably not going to do something as modernist as this, but it's interesting to show that they've got some quite cool architecture in Pras Sands. This very much looks like it should be in Greece or something, with the white concrete. It's probably painted stone or something. But yeah, so they're the 3 kind of local vernaculars. And the next thing we're going to explore are references, and we're going to dive into Pinterest very quickly, and we're going to put together a mood board discussing these features and materiality that we have discussed in terms of the stone, in terms of timber, and see how we can maybe find some examples of more modern interpretation of barns and how they play with materiality. So diving into Pinterest, I have pinned some items that I think are useful and relevant, and some architecture features that I think we should explore in the design. And I'm going to very quickly show you how I can drop this into Rayon and start putting together a mood board. So in Rayon, in our canvas, I'm going to come over to the left hand side here, click the menu tab, which is the 3 lines, import image, and I'm just going to go over to my precedents, select them, open. And what it's going to do is it's going to drop straight into place. And you've got, obviously, at the top, you've got the kind of transform tools. So we can move it, we can drag it over to here. Obviously, we want it to be a bit smaller, so we're going to drag that down. And one thing you can do is you can double click into the image and you can start cropping it to all kinds of shapes, which I think is quite a nice tool. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop a couple images together, and I'm going to talk through some of the key architectural features that we want to explore. And as I do this, you can also see that the snapping tool is activated. So you can make a nice mood board where things are snapping to one another. Okay, so now we've dropped some of these images in and we've got a bit of a mood board going. Now I'm just going to highlight with some text. So down here at the bottom, you can select the text tool. I'm just going to start annotating some of these drawings and talking through some of the key features that I think would be useful to use and reference as we're designing the scheme. So with this first one, I think it's the interesting thing here is the very simple geometry with the kind of obviously the pitched roof, and you've got the timber contrasting with the stone, but also having a kind of similar color palette. You've got that warm rustic feel. And when you add your text, you can click done. And as you can see, it's coming at 1:1. So it's coming very small, but on this right hand side, we can scale that up to 10 mil, maybe a bit bigger. Let's do 20 mil. And that will scale the tag up. This next one I think is also very similar. I think the stone is a little bit too heavy. I'm not so sure on the grey. I don't think this would respond very well to the kind of local colour and texture of Cornwall. However, I like the horizontal language of the windows and the geometry slicing through the building. And you can clearly see here that there are some expansive views slicing through the building with lots of glazing. And I think this is a really nice way of kind of integrating the design through glazing, through openings, into the surrounding landscape. Now, this one is kind of similar to the first one in that it's a very simple geometry, but I think the addition of the timber slats work really well here because you've got that really nice vertical element and you've got that vertical kind of floor to ceiling window, obviously not quite ceiling, that pokes into the geometry. And you've got a really nice effect with the shadow and with the pitched roof. So we like the vertical timber. And even the dark timber looks quite nice. Quite like the black. We then got this one down here, which I think is arguably my favourite, in that it's just a really sleek horizontal element through the landscape. It almost looks like it's kind of floating and working with the views of the landscape. It's working with the horizontal kind of horizon of the sea. And I think it works really well. And as you can see here, very similar to the one above, they've got windows that are penetrating all the way through the building. So you get that feeling of when the doors are open, it feels like you are part of that environment and that you're kind of invited into the landscape. And then this one here, I think, is just a case of a really simple mass that is sat on top of one another, embedded into the landscape. As you can see here, this is quite a steep slope down, and they're simply just stepping the massing down, which I think is just a really successful way of doing it. Entering the building at one level and making your way down the scheme, down the property as you go through the building. And then finally, this one here, I think, is just a really nice, kind of interesting geometry. Very simple masses that are very clear. The kind of volumes are very much defined. So you very much have this clear language of these kind of volumes that are sat on top of one another. So you've almost got these 3 blocks. And I think it's a really nice, just simple way of stacking the geometry and creating spaces of closure and openings and having this tiered effect in the elevation. And this section at the end here is just very much demonstrating alternative ways of how we can utilize the landscape and work with the landscape. This one here very much is embedding the mass into the landscape, so it's kind of hidden. This one is poking out with elements hidden. And this bottom one here is showing how you could use maybe some indoor and outdoor features using the landscape as part of the interior and external space. And they're just some really useful kind of examples of embedding the design into the landscape. So this is our mood board, picking up on some of the key features that I believe are going to be kind of good references moving forward for the scheme, and some of the languages that we want to pick up on in response to the brief. Obviously responding to the local vernacular of the Cornwall stone, the kind of barn feel of Cornwall, maximizing views over the landscape. And this gives us a good basis moving forward now into understanding the site and the site conditions.